So breath work is a great way to balance the nervous system, and it's a great way to get into the body in a safe way, right? So that's one tactic. Meditation's another tactic. Something as simple as going out for a walk and grounding yourself, being out in nature, getting into a cold plunge, exercise, yoga, anything that's going to bring you into your body in a safe way that's non-threatening is going to help calm the nervous system.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Ilene Smith, who shares how to master our inner game so we can live with ease and vitality. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote comes from Marissa Bussevert. I've learned that the key to mastering the art of living is learning how to pay attention. When you're mindful, when you're in the moment, you are mastering the art of living. Too often, I think, where are we? We're in the future, what's going to happen tomorrow, or in the past. What happened yesterday, or all of those noises in our head. But how often are you in the present moment, not thinking about either of those and just enjoying it for what it is? That's kind of the key to what that quote is all about. Everything starts with a strong foundation. However, we as humans have a tendency to want to skip that step. Doesn't matter the activity or the endeavor. We love to do the fun parts. Building the foundation is a step that isn't always fun. And so many people skip it, only to have everything collapse like a house of cards. It doesn't have to be that way. We're going to chat with Ilene about this topic and a lot more, and also how to create a life of resilience. Our guest, Ilene Smith, is an author, former trauma therapist, creator of the Truth Method, a successful entrepreneur, investor, dedicated mentor. She's got a rich professional background, 2 master's degrees, extensive training in somatic therapy, and she's consistently demonstrated the embodiment of resilience and fortitude. She's faced adversity and had to overcome early life traumas and the sudden loss of her late husband. The challenges help her to reinforce her core belief: life is going to happen. It's how you receive the pain and information and how you choose to move forward that matters most. She's committed to helping people and facilitating personal transformation for entrepreneurs as well as many future generations of leaders. She does this through her program, The Truth Method. Let's meet Ilene and see how she does it. Welcome to Richer Soul, Ilene Smith. It's great to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up? And how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Such a good question. What was it like growing up? So I grew up in a upper middle class Jewish family in New York, and I watched success being built. My dad and uncle were in business with my grandfather, and they were building small multifamily homes, and they built it into a much bigger business. So I grew up watching success and watching what it took to build a business. And my dad had a really pretty healthy relationship with money, in the sense of, I think he really taught us that money was really good for more choices, and that not to be identified by how much money you have, and that, money was really a utility. So I learned a lot by watching and seeing, how he dealt with money and how responsible he was. And I think he taught us really good values around money, about saving, about enjoying life and spending, and having the balance, spend some, save some, you'll always have some. So learned a lot from watching my dad. As far as school, I don't think I learned a lot in school about money. I think it was really more from my dad. I don't think I learned a lot in school, period, but that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, I don't think they don't teach you like budgeting and skills. Like, there's no adulting in school. Maybe they teach it now, but I don't remember growing up really learning much about money. And then I went into, I went to college. I went into more of into the arts. So I didn't have a lot of business skills going out into the real world, other than what I watched at home.
And that's interesting. We do find that most schools don't teach money. You were lucky that your dad taught you money. And as a businessman, it makes sense. And sounds like he was very intentional, though, in teaching you how to use money, how to value money, and how to make it work for you.
Yeah, but I do think it wasn't until I got out in the real world that I really understood what it takes to earn a living and make money and have nice things, and that it doesn't really grow on trees. You really have to earn it, right? Yeah. And you have to be mindful in your actions with money.
And you do. And I think that's kind of the lesson, though. I think it's really hard for kids to contextualize it as a kid. And usually at that point, they roll their eyes at their parents. But then 5-10 years later, they're like, oh, those lessons did actually apply. Oh, now that all makes sense. And I think there's a lot of parts of life that probably fall into that as well.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I think the big thing is, I think about this one idea. When you make money versus it being somebody giving you money, the way you spend it is very different. Because I know for myself, I think about my first jobs, right? Like I babysat, and then I worked at Baskin Robbins, and, I had summer jobs. And I always, there was something so rewarding, right? About getting that money, having that money in the bank, knowing that it was mine, I earned it, I can do what I want with it, versus being given an allowance. Totally different spend. So I think it's really interesting that, just the relationship that we have with money in the different avenues that we receive it.
And that is probably why most people who get an inheritance or win the lottery have a very difficult time holding on to it.
Yeah, it's why second and third generational wealth, they want that I think there's some crazy statistics around this, that second and third generational wealth, like, money's gone.
It is, and I think so. I have a theory of why this is. And I'm seeing it more and more, I think, especially just what's happening in the country. As you become wealthy, you don't want your kids to struggle. And if they don't know how to struggle, and it's the building of grit and determination and perseverance and knowing how to go out and make things happen and having the desire to do it. If you have too much comfort, we're humans. We become lazy.
Wow.
And all we have to do is look at, well, and I'm sure every generation says, look at today's young workforce, but it seems like it's following that same path. And unless there are bad times, and I think that's where recessions help, is they remind people that it's not so easy.
No, it's true. But I think you make a very interesting point about, and the balance, right? You don't want your kids to have to suffer or, go through the hardships that you go through, but how do you help them build character around money, savings? It's a pretty tricky thing, right? Because if you know your kid's going to inherit a bunch of money, you want to make sure they actually understand money, right? So you have to have them involved, and you have to start giving them exposure to it. The problem is what happens when somebody thinks that they have the money, right? So I think it's a very hard balance to teach your kids good values around money when they know they're getting a pile of money. It's a tough one.
We always told our kids, your parents are rich, you're broke, you're going to have to figure it out. We'll give you a hand.
You'll get the money when you don't need it.
Yeah. And that was our goal. We want to teach you how to build wealth so that you get the money when you no longer need it.
Yeah, no, I think it's the right way to do it. I mean, I've seen it done the other way, and you don't get a good result.
No, and I don't think because most people have never experienced that or seen that, they don't realize that. And they think they're doing right, but what they're doing is harm.
No, 100%. Yeah, I've got some firsthand experience with watching this, so it can be very destructive.
It can be. So your dad teaches you about money. I think you said you went off to college. You did arts, or?
I went to college, and then, it's interesting. So my dad is very interesting because I learned about money and good values around money from my dad, but I graduated college, and being of my generation, really, and a Jewish girl from New York, is really what I supposed to do. I was supposed to get married and have a family. And I at 25, I met someone, and at 24, I got engaged. And then I canceled my wedding the morning of, at 25, the morning of. And I had not really given, a lot of thought about career. Like, I went from college and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went to grad school, and, being cultured that way, my dad paid for my grad school. And so now here I am, I get engaged. I'm with someone, and I cancel the wedding the morning of. And it's like, okay, now I have to go make a living. Now I really have to think about how I'm going to make money. And it was a big wake up call. And I figured it out, right? I mean, I had good survival skills and good resources. And I wound up getting involved in real estate and the title end of real estate. And then eventually I got into the mortgage business, and one thing led to another. And I had done pretty okay. I was making great money in my 30s. it's money, career, all of it becomes a journey, right? To really be able to find your footing and find your orientation and figure out what your values are around money. So I had a pretty interesting wild ride there. And
what made you cancel day of?
It's a long story. I knew I would wind up divorced. But the truth of the matter is that tough conversation should have happened the moment, when I got engaged, or at least before we started planning a wedding. But I didn't have the courage, right? Because why do we avoid tough conversations? We avoid them because of fear. And when we feel fearful about something, our natural tendency, because humans are wired to survive and to move away from pain, our natural tendency is to avoid. And the more we avoid, the more we feel the fear. And I got stuck in the cycle. And as we know, problems never get worse by ignoring them. And, it took on a life of its own. So that was me I would be honest with you, it's just me not being courageous the way I needed to be. But I was fearful of what other people would think, how my then boyfriend Wayne would respond. I was fearful of the status quo of my life changing, right? We've been together for 4 years. So, all those things will move you away from pain.
They will. So, that's a pretty bold decision.
Yeah. Well, but it should have been done sooner than the morning of the wedding. But that's okay. You live and you learn.
And I think that's probably true for most decisions we have in life, right? We put stuff off instead of just ripping the Band-Aid off and calling it a day. We continue to just put it off, or to ignore it, or to hope it will magically solve itself.
And it goes into even the conversation about money, right? Like having to deal with money things. Like you're always better dealing with things up front, planning up front, looking at your tax structures up front, right? Dealing with whatever needs to be negotiated, better sooner than later, right? It's really kind of I think that was a good lesson for me. But after that experience, I kind of learned pretty quickly that dealing with things sooner than later is always a better way to go.
It is. So how did you get from the world of real estate and mortgages to where you are today?
So I wound up in the mortgage business. I wound up on the wholesale side of mortgage lending. And in 2000, I was working for a bank and here in Arizona, and they were taken over by the FDIC. And that was when the mortgage market fell apart, and I was doing what we call Alt-A lending, which was that kind of niche between A and B products. And all of those mortgages started to default. So when the housing market fell apart in 2008-9, I took some time off, and then I decided to go back to school and get a master's in mental health counseling. And I went in a totally different direction. But I was always paying attention to money. I'd always been investing in real estate deals. I did some hard money lending. So I always kind of, even though I was moving out of that world, and I decided that I wanted to be in an environment and doing something to really be giving back, I always kept my business senses sharp, and I was always investing. So went back to school. As you know, I authored a book. I practiced. I was a trauma expert for many years. And last year, I decided to close my practice. And I didn't know what was next. And I just was, in complete surrender to whatever's supposed to be next is going to happen. And I started getting involved here in Arizona. There's a lot going on in the tech world. This is becoming the next tech hub. I think we're calling it Silicon Desert. And I got involved with a bunch of young tech founders, and one thing led to another. And I'm getting to actually straddle both worlds. I'm getting to mentor these young founders. I've gotten opportunities to invest. through this whole process, I've got involved. I'm actually going to be working with a venture capital fund as an active partner. And I get to I'm kind of the liaison between young founders and investors. And I get to mentor these young founders. I get to help them with connectivity and access. So as they're trying to solve problems, whether it's distribution or figuring out what the right problems are, I get to guide them. And I've got a pretty big Rolodex, and using the word Rolodex, right? Does anyone use that word anymore? And but I have a lot of really good, deep connections, and I get to do the things that I'm really good at doing, which is connecting the dots and helping people solve problems. So I do the personal and the professional mentorship. So it's been really fun, and it's been a really exciting time to be able to venture into this and use my psychological assets and my business assets and bring everything together. In that process, I'll tell you about that a little later on, but I created a whole process for entrepreneurs to go through to be able to bring, to really create a more grounded inner world, to be able to be better leaders. Because leadership really starts with how you lead yourself.
It does.
That was a mouthful. That was a mouthful.
It was. And we're going to talk about that. Before we do, I just want to make a comment. A Rolodex is very different than 1,000 social media friends.
Amen. It's your relationships. Relationships are everything. Relationships are everything. And if you don't have good, deep relationships with people, it's hard to get anything done.
It's amazing when you have the ability to cut through all the noise and get people on the phone and ask for a favor that have the ability to move the needle. It's shocking how fast things can move in a sticky world.
Yeah, I'm working with a young founder right now, and he solved a big problem with HSAs, health savings accounts. And what we've gotten accomplished in the last 2 months would have taken him 2 years. So, it's pretty cool to see the power of relationships. And also, I think, from this perspective of how, when you have those relationships intact, how willing people are, how much willingness there is for people to help.
People like to help other people. And I think that's the part that most people don't realize is that very human tendency.
Well, there's nothing better than being of service, is there? Really, if you think about it.
No. This kind of brings us to something that I've heard you say. If the inside world is not organized and it's in chaos, all your decisions are from fear. And just from what I know of most people, I've got to believe that the vast majority of people are living in disorganization.
You are correct. So let me break that down a little bit. So the reason why the inside world may not be fully intact and a person may not feel grounded, and maybe just give you some examples, they're anxious in their day-to-day, they have difficulty motivating, they are reactive, they're constantly feeling like everyone's out to get them. All of those things, maybe their self-esteem is low. All of those things are actually what they come down to is mostly unresolved trauma and a person not feeling safe within themselves. And when you don't feel safe, when I say safe, trying to figure out, let me give examples of that. Like when you're anxious, what is anxiety? Anxiety is basically a mechanism it's a message your body gives you that tells you that there's some danger around you. And when you have anxiety, you're going to operate from a place of fear. And fear is, when you are fearful, your body is going to do one or three things. It's going to fight, it's going to flight, run away, or it's going to totally shut down. So whether it's anxiety, depression, low self-worth, or a number of things that don't allow you to be able, all those things are fear-based, and they're not going to allow you to make decisions from an empowered place. You're going to make decisions from the point of reference and the orientation of surviving. And when you feel fearful and you sense danger, think about how that decision making process will go versus I'm okay, I don't feel anxious. Think about how different that process is going to be. Because if you're feeling like everything's okay, the higher functioning part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, where all your executive function takes place, that's where the decisions get made from. When you are sensing danger and there's some element in fear inside of you, you can't make decisions using the prefrontal cortex. You're using the lower functioning parts of the brain that are wired up for survival.
It does. One of the things I've heard you say is that anxiety is physical versus mental.
How do you know you're anxious? If you're anxious, how do you know you're anxious? You are going to feel some sort of sensory experience in your body. And then your brain is going to try to override it and say, why am I anxious? Why am I anxious? But the sensations of anxiety are all in your body. Same with depression. You have a physical sensation when you're depressed, and you have a physical sensation when you're anxious.
And so how do we get into the body and tame our nervous system?
Good question. Well, there's lots of different entry points, but the first piece is being able to observe your experience rather than distracting yourself by trying to understand why. Understanding why you're anxious or depressed is just a way for you to distract yourself from feeling the sensations in your body. So there's no way around it. You have to move through it, right? And so the more you can teach your body that you're not going to die from those sensations, that's how you build resilience in your body to be able to move through those sensory experiences that feel like they're so threatening to your system. It's observation and then staying with the sensation. Those are great entry points.
How much does breath work help with that?
So breath work is a great way to balance the nervous system, and it's a great way to get into the body in a safe way, right? So that's one tactic. Meditation's another tactic. Something as simple as going out for a walk and grounding yourself, being out in nature, getting into a cold plunge, exercise, yoga, anything that's going to bring you into your body in a safe way that's non-threatening is going to help calm the nervous system.
Earlier in the conversation, you talked about trauma. So what is trauma? Because we're not talking about physical trauma.
Well, it could be physical, but trauma, we think about trauma as an event, but trauma is energy that gets locked in the body when you experience real or perceived threat, right? So it explains why 10 people can experience the same car accident, right? And have 10 different reactions. So what does that tell you? It tells you that trauma is individualized. And so what makes an event traumatic for one person versus not making it traumatic for another person is this. How safe did they feel going into the event? And how much natural resilience they had going into the event. And then how safe they felt in the aftermath of an event. That's why first responders are so important when there's a natural disaster, or the EMT people. So in the process of the event, in the actual event happening, a person doesn't have any capacity. They didn't get to defend themselves, right? So that's what makes it so their body's left in a state of feeling scared, right? Like let's go back to the car accident. So somebody gets into a car accident. They're driving the car. They didn't have they get sideswiped. They didn't have too much too soon, too fast without any way to defend themselves. Okay. Then let's say right after the car accident, the first responders show up right away. There's some really, really amazing people that are there, the EMTs, and they've held a safe space for the person that just had the accident. And then maybe that person had really good support from friends and family right afterwards. Chances are that person will be less traumatized. It also will impact how safe they felt going into it. Like if they had 3 or 4 previous car accidents, they might not feel as resilient. So it just depends, right? So there's a million factors that go into an event being traumatic or not, right? So you can go through the car accident with, the EMT people, an ambulances, it took them 45 minutes to get there. And then somebody didn't have support afterwards. It's going to look very different.
And that makes sense. Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. One of the things you've said is traumatic memories are held differently in the body from other memories. What do you mean by that?
So traumatic memories are going to be stored in the part of the brain that's survival. So let's say the car accident. What would happen is, let's say the person gets in the car, every time they get in the car, if it's not resolved, right? If it's, let's just call it a traumatic event. If it's not resolved, then every time they get in the car, there may be this level of hypervigilance because trauma has no sense of time or space. So actually every time maybe the person got hit from the right side, every time the person sees somebody coming towards a stop sign, and they're worried they're going to get T-boned, they slam on their brakes, right? Because they are actually, their body believes that they're back at the old scene of the accident where they got hit. So they live in this state of hypervigilance every time they get in the car, right? If any cars are coming from the right side. So trauma memories get stored. So their knee-jerk reaction is survival, right? Like they're gonna go into a defensive posture and they're gonna slam on the brake, right? Or they're gonna accelerate the car to get through the intersection, right? So they're gonna fight or flight. So that's the survival physiology, and that's where that memory is stored, in the place where all the survival physiology is. So that fight, flight, and freeze physiology. So that's how they're going to react to the world, is in survival.
And I'm guessing there's no part of the body where we can store instant joy and elation. Like every time X happens, we just automatically get thrilled, huh?
Well, we have a level of resilience, right? And so the hippocampus, which is the emotional brain, that part of the brain is where we store all the emotions, right? So if we have beautiful memories, maybe every time we smell something or we see something that reminds us of that, it's going to bring us instant joy.
We got to program that better.
What do you mean? Oh, we got to program that better. Yeah. Oh, for sure. But it's available to us, right? It's just depending upon where you're oriented. Are you oriented more towards your trauma, or are you oriented more towards your just the other piece of your life, right? The more what I call the healing trauma vortex or healing vortex. So since some people that have had a lot of trauma and it's not resolved, they're going to be, everything's going to orient towards the trauma vortex. And those are the people that, like, how was your day? And no matter, even if it was a good day, right? They're going to be like, the day was good, but, right? Those people, right? Everything is yes, but. That's going to be an orientation towards the trauma vortex.
One of the things you said earlier is that trauma was, I think, and this might not be the right word you use, but like stuck energy or trapped energy. How do we unlock the energy? So
what I was saying is trauma is not necessarily about the event, right? The way I explained it with why 10 people have the car accident and have 10 different responses. But it's that energy that's stuck in the body when we've had real or perceived threat. So what has to happen? Let's take the traumatic event of the car accident. The way that would get resolved ultimately is to bring somebody back into that experience and have them go through the event and move through it with a sense of mastery. And there's something that happens when we do that, what we call a biological completion, and that's how the nervous system gets reset. So if I was taking somebody through that traumatic event, at some point they would say, I would say to them, well, if you could have defended yourself in the moment of that accident when the car had hit you, what would you have done? And there'll be some physical movement in the body that will help reset the nervous system. It's just a natural thing that happens. And they might say, I would turn this way. And I'd have them repeat the movement so they can actually feel that sense of safety in that experience. It's what animals do naturally. So animals in the wild don't get traumatized. So why don't they get traumatized? They have a natural ability to shake off and reset their nervous system. And that's what that movement that I'm talking about, like that would happen in say, working with someone with the car accident. The animals do that naturally. They basically will be able to reset their systems. So we as humans, that's kind of basically the same thing that we have to do to start building the body back to safety, to restore that sense of safety.
That's interesting that animals don't have that.
Well, they have their systems. They don't have a prefrontal cortex, so their systems are way more. They're using more ancient methods to heal themselves, right? Our prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning, has gotten in the way. We don't use those. We have all these much more sophisticated ways of trying to manage, right? To manage lives, right? But the prefrontal cortex is what allows us not to just punch someone when we feel some sense of threat, right? It's made us much more civilized.
If you say so.
To some degree.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're working on now. You've created a new program called the Truth Method. Can you tell us what that is and who it's for and what's involved?
So the Truth Method is a program mostly for entrepreneurs or anyone who is feeling that they are stuck in their life and that they know that the way they're living their life is not, it doesn't feel right. It's something in their lives don't feel right. A lot of times it's entrepreneurs. They have all the answers for everyone else, but they don't have the answers for themselves. And this program is really designed, it's a year-long program, and it's designed to help someone step into all the pieces of themselves that they don't want to connect with. And by doing so, And when we align with what I call the shadow parts of ourselves, right? Those parts of ourselves that don't feel safe, the parts of ourselves that we want to turn away from, and the parts of ourselves that are, I would just say, getting in the way of us showing up fully for our own lives, then, then life changes. So it's about becoming a good leader for yourself so that you can be a better leader for others. And that's the gist of the program. And it's really about teaching somebody how to empower themselves and actually be able to have all those things within them lose their charge so that they just are. And there's the self-critic is gone. All the judgment of yourself and others, right? Because the way you judge other people and the way you criticize other people are really the way you're criticizing yourself. So it's removing all those limitations and creating a life that has more expansion, more creativity, more power, and more growth, right? So it's I call it what the program is. It's about transformation, and transformation can only happen when you step into the parts of yourselves that you keep avoiding.
How do most people get into the situation where they need something like this? Like, what's the cause or what's happening that they get there?
Really good question. I think that there's two things. People go down the path, right? You become an entrepreneur and you want success in your life and you believe and you're showing up. Most entrepreneurs, they're driven to entrepreneurship because there was something that they felt like they needed to achieve that they didn't get in their lives, or something that was lacking. And they believe that chasing the outcome, right? If I have all the money and I have all the toys and I have the beautiful wife and I have the cars and I have all this, life will be great. What they forgot to do along the way is, so they've been chasing this outcome, but it doesn't take care of what's empty and unfulfilled inside. So all that growth and building externally basically was a distraction to the pain that they were feeling inside initially that was driving them to success. So that's how that generally happens. It's kind of like, I like to think of it this way. Think about if you ran a marathon, but you didn't put all the work in to run the marathon, and all of a sudden you're at the finish line and somebody's putting a medal around your neck. You'd be like, okay, is this it? Is that all there is? Right? So it's not outcome. It's about if we don't take the time to get to know ourselves, and we don't take the time to work with the pieces that create imposter syndrome, and work with the pieces that all the fear, right? All the places where we shame ourselves and the way that we betray ourselves. You get to the outcome, but you don't have any satisfaction. You're just constantly chasing something that doesn't exist. So that's where the internal work becomes so valuable, because you can't enjoy all the fruits of your labor until you get the inside piece of your mechanics working in the right way. Because otherwise, you're saying yes. What happens is you say yes when you mean no. You feel like your only value is the next check that you write or the next vacation you take your family on. So all those pieces, it's like we've got to go back. It's like reverse engineering so that there's a deeper level of satisfaction, and all the other stuff on the outside just becomes it's like gravy.
So the original tagline for the podcast was, "You got rich, now what?" Because everybody chases the money, thinking that it will bring the rest of this and the happiness, and they get the money if they're lucky or if they're good. And then they realize, wait a minute, where's, they're expecting all of this stuff that never shows up. If anything, it goes the opposite direction.
And that's where people wind up with a lot of money, and they wind up in very destructive patterns, and they go about it the wrong way with trying to fix it, right? And what they do is they get into these destructive patterns, And they take everything that could have been good and they head down a path of just destruction. And it doesn't have to be that way. My message to everyone is really, it doesn't have to be that way, but you have to put the internal work in. And there's no way around, this is what people don't understand. There's no way around the pain. Okay? You don't build and drive. You don't have that much drive because you were content going in. So that contentment that lack of contentment doesn't go away. It actually becomes worse as you create more wealth. Right. And then there's a moment in time, it's like, I'm just not satisfied. I'm bored. I'm not satisfied. What do I do now? I need a new wife. I need a new car. I need a new house. To find yourself in the same place. So this is work that's why I really like working with these young founders early on. Like, hey, they're building success. They're building these companies. Let's get to it now before you wind up in that place. And, when people say I don't have time, you have to make the time for this, because this ultimately allows you to be smarter in your life on every level.
It does. And I have found, and it really doesn't matter what we're talking about. It's very rare that people want to put the time in to build a foundation. Right? And it doesn't matter whether it's your life, the core things that you need to do to create a business, even just every single part of life. Everyone wants to do the fun or the exciting or the end game. Nobody seems to want to do building that boring foundation upon which everything is built.
I will say this, there's no quick fix. So if you think there's a way around it, there's not. It's the only way past something is through it. And I think it's a very important thing that people understand this. We have to feel into our discomfort in order to grow. Right? And this is like an interesting thing, right? There's something called the law of polarity, and everything at its extreme turns into its opposite. So if you can understand this from a pain perspective, if you can go to the deepest, darkest places of your pain, what's on the other side is blissful. But there has to be a commitment and a willingness to be uncomfortable for a while. That's the secret sauce, in my opinion.
People don't want to get uncomfortable.
No, but it's so simple. The discomfort is where all the growth happens. So nobody ever died from an emotion. Nobody ever died from a feeling. So I just invite people to really think about that. You're not going to die from a feeling. You're only going to create something more powerful for yourself if you allow yourself to feel it. And that's a big part of the Truth Method program. I use the word embodiment. It's about learning embodiment. It's about building resilience in your body. And when you do that, your capacity to manage stress becomes you have a totally different relationship with stress. It allows you to let the stress move through your body rather than it taking over your body.
Interesting. I always say life is pretty simple. Doing simple is hard.
I like it. Well, we make it more complicated than it needs to be. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's about moving through your experiences rather than trying to circumnavigate around them. That's where growth and healing happens.
And that's the other thing, you don't grow on top of the mountain, you grow in the valley. And
like it.
You learn there, it's just what happens.
That is where growth happens. I like that. I'm gonna actually steal that from you. Grow at the top of the mountain, you grow in the valley. Oh, it's so true.
Yes. And everybody wants to be on top of the mountain, but,
really not that great up there especially if you haven't done the work. If you haven't gone to the valley.
Well,
if you haven't gone to the valley, you can't enjoy the top of the mountain.
Which brings us back to where we began the conversation. If you don't let kids go through the valley and build the financial foundations, they blow it all.
Oh, you know what? What a great wrap up and to bring that back around, because it's really true.
Is there anything I should have asked you about today that I didn't, that you would love to chat about?
I would just say this. I just encourage anyone who is feeling some level of discomfort in their life to take a look inside and not think that it's an outside job, that it's really about going inward. And it's a powerful process, but you have to be committed to it. It's about commitment.
The biggest obstacle in life is the reflection in the mirror.
Yeah. If we choose that.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Attitude. It's about an attitude of curiosity and willingness. But attitude plays a big part in how we move into success in our life.
It is. We all choose our attitude. You get to choose how you react.
Yeah. And I always say, I see people get stuck in being the victims of their life. It's like, you cannot control what happened in the past, but you can choose how you move forward in your life.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
To follow my intuition, that not everyone else is smarter than me. There's a lot of smart people out there, but my intuition is really strong, and to trust it, especially around money, by the way. It's a big one for me later in life.
You did it on your wedding day.
Yeah. That was probably the first time I trusted my intuition.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
18-year-old, I'm thinking about my 18-year-old self, is to be kind to yourself, because the way you speak to other people and the way you speak to yourself is the way you're going to show up in the world for other people.
That makes a lot of sense, right? How we do one thing is how we do all things. If people would like to learn more about you, your programs, your book, where can they find you and learn more about you?
Here. So my website is ilenesmith.com, and Ilene is ILENE Smith.com, or on Instagram, it's the Ilene Smith. And I think probably on Facebook, but I never go there. Does anyone use Facebook anymore?
Yes, and I think it depends. I will tell you, I have noticed that it has dramatically shifted, and I don't know what changed, but their algorithms took people away from what they wanted. And so if you don't see your friends and you don't know what's going on in their worlds, then why am I on Facebook? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Are you holding on to trauma of any sort that's holding you back from the success you deserve? I'll be honest, I am. We're going to do an episode where we chat just about that, and have the person on who kind of helped me work through some of that stuff. Have you built the strong foundation? I got to tell you, I wish I knew these things when I was in my 20s. I never heard people talk about them. But yet, as I learned today, I see a lot of this stuff was around. I just wasn't paying attention. Hopefully, I do so more today. My biggest goal is that everyone find their next step forward and take it, and learn to let go of whatever is holding them back. The negative thoughts are real. We all have them. You can't stop them, but you can learn to ignore them, to dance with them, to tell them to be quiet. And part of that is creating the tools and practices that work for you. See, not everything works for everybody. You got to figure out what works for you. And that's not always easy. By the way, who would you know that would enjoy this episode of Rip Your Soul? I'd really appreciate it if you would share it with them, or maybe just share it on social. Next week, we've got Make Your Money Matter with Brad Barrett. I know you're going to enjoy it. Have a wonderful and abundant week.